And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all! See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it.
Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello everybody, I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host Mark Snyder, and I'm going to be speaking today about the Billy Meier case, and I think we'll be bringing Solaris Blue Raven on a little bit later. Hopefully you're hearing me now. It's kind of difficult to tell sometimes at the beginning of this show, so let me get started. Edward Albert Meier is an 81-year-old man from Switzerland. He lives in a tiny mountain village called Hinterschmid-Ruti. He's written, I just recently learned that he's actually written 65 books. I have just 5 of them, 1 in electronic form, 4 of them in actual physical books. One's called The Way to Live. The other one is called The Talmud of Emmanuel. I recently had a listener send me this book. This was not written by Billy, although he has many sections in it that he has written to describe what's there. Another book called The Psyche, another book called The Might of Thoughts. They're all written in German originally and then translated into English. And to me, over the years, I've found these books to be the greatest source of wisdom that I've ever run across. And I'm not going to repeat so much about who Billy is and what he's done, at least this point in the show. I want to dive right into a contact report. Billy has 2,000 contact reports, and these are the literal conversations that he's had with these extraterrestrials that he has met with. Now, on Contact Report 256, it talks about the pyramids in Egypt, and it talks about the subterranean rooms that are underneath the pyramids, and they were built under the direction of human beings who were of extraterrestrial origin. And these human beings came to the earth about, well, different times, but this particular group was from the constellation of Orion, and another group from the constellation of Leo. So they directed the building of the pyramids, and Billy describes a trip he had to the Great Pyramid in Egypt when he was back at 16 years old. His second extraterrestrial mentor, a woman named Asket from the Tao universe, took him far below the Giza Plateau into these old cubicle constructions that were about 73,000 years old. And in those cubicle constructions, Billy saw a gigantic disc-shaped spaceship that was underneath the Earth with a series of smaller ships in the middle of this giant hall deep below the surface of the Earth. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Orion Constellation, because these extraterrestrials that were guiding the building of the pyramids were from Orion. Now, in the Orion Constellation is in the image of a hunter in Greek mythology, and there are three major stars that are sometimes called Orion's Belt. And these three major stars are Al-Nilam, Mintaka, and Al-Nitak. That's my best pronunciation of these. And the three major pyramids in Egypt align with these three stars. Now, what's really interesting about these stars, for example, the one called Al-Nilam, is a large blue supergiant star that's 2,000 light years distant. 2,000 light years from Earth. Now think about this. These extraterrestrials were so advanced that they could make these trips of 2,000 light years. And my understanding is they can do that with almost no time passing. Now, this Al-Nilam star, one of the stars that is lined up with the pyramids, is estimated to be 275,000 times as luminous as the sun. So it's that much brighter. And it's some 30 to 60 times more massive. And there's other ancient structures that are built in alignment with these stars. For example, in Teotihuacan in Mexico, I believe there are 3 pyramids there that align with these stars just as well. So it's very, very interesting what's happened on the Earth, that we've had extraterrestrial contact in the past. The pyramids are a good thing to talk about because we have physical evidence there. Even though our researchers have not understood yet the physical evidence and what it really, really means. So I'm going to jump to another topic here. I'm going to talk about several topics. In the first hour of the show, we're going to talk about Orion, the constellation of Orion, and I didn't really talk about so much yet about the constellation of Leo, which is the Sphinx is aligned with the constellation of Leo. That's the other. And there were also extraterrestrials from Leo that came here during that time as well. And then I'm going to talk about reincarnation a bit. And this is all in the first hour. We're going to be talking about a whole series of events that the Myra material talk about that are right around the corner. We're going to talk about one of Billy's books called The Might of Thoughts, and at some point in all this I'm going to bring in Solaris if she's still able to come on the show. The second hour I'm going to talk about creation. Billy calls our universe creation. He also talks about the intelligence behind our universe's creation. I'm going to talk about a book called The Psyche a little bit. I'm going to read a little bit from the Talmud of Emmanuel, and I'm going to finish up the show talking about the New World Order. So that's kind of our introduction into what's going to go on today. So let me move. We talked about these extraterrestrials that were on the Earth 73,000 years ago. Well, most spirit forms on the Earth, when I say spirit form, I'm talking about every living thing has a spirit form, whether it's an animal, a plant, or a human being. So if we take just human beings, for example, most Earth human beings beings that were born on the earth, I say earth humans because there are human beings from other worlds and other galaxies, other time-space configurations, for example. And that is a very unique concept in some ways to the Maya material. You know, we talk about dimensions, and the physical aspect of our universe is divided into 7 different time-space configurations. And these extraterrestrials, not only can they jump, example, from these 3 stars in the belt of Orion all the way to Earth, but they can move in and out of these different space-time configurations. So when you're talking about traveling, it is a slightly different mindset that you have to have. And the technologies here are, of course, very, very phenomenal. And I wanted to switch gears to reincarnation because I was talking about the human spirit form. And every human being has what's called a spirit form. And it's a bit of fine matter. In the Maya material, it's called a fragment of the universal consciousness. And we all have a fragment of the universal consciousness in us. And it enters into the child when the child is only 21 days old, still an embryo. And that spirit form brings with it your consciousness. And the spirit form embeds itself in the middle brain in an area called the superior colliculus. And the superior colliculus is the part of the brain where all of the senses are integrated together. So your eyesight, your hearing, your smell, your taste, your speech, everything is controlled in the superior colliculus. And it brings with it the spirit form. It's called the Geist form in the German. All of Billy's books are written in German. And the Geist form brings with it your conscious mind, your subconscious mind, and your unconscious mind. And programmed into your subconscious mind are all of the evolutive values of your accumulated lifetimes. Everything that you've learned about confidence, optimism, logic, fairness, a sense of duty, a sense of honor, a sense of love, all of the wisdom that you've learned is programmed into your subconscious. Now, when this child comes back to life, I say, when the spirit form comes in, the heart starts to beat, and the child really is a living human being at that point. Now, its material consciousness, as I call it, is the subconscious, the unconscious, and the conscious mind. The subconscious is programmed with all these evolutive values from the previous lives, but it's all subconscious. So the child really doesn't know any of this per se. Now what happens as it grows up and it gets older, the subconscious of the child will impulse the conscious mind with this information from his previous lives. Like, it kind of gives you a hint, like, this is what you should do in this situation. This is what being a responsible person means in this situation. Now, also, you have a spirit form as a part of your consciousness. And the spirit form also impulses the conscious mind. So, for example, a spirit form comes into a child, and the spirit form could be, for example, 4.5 million years old. And that's actually about an average age for here on the earth. There are some spirit forms that are 8 to 12 million years old. And these people probably came here to the earth on ships in the past. We started talking about the pyramid, and we started the show, and I was talking about the fact that the Great Pyramid is 73,000 years old. Well, if you happen to come here on a ship in the very, very ancient past, 73,000 years ago or farther, longer ago, and you died on the earth, your spirit form leaves you, and it takes your consciousness into the energy band around the earth. And you enter into the reincarnational cycles of the earth. Now, some people may say, hey, that sounds terrible. And it could be that way. If you came from a higher advanced civilization, to reincarnate into a less developed society has its difficulties and challenges. So there's one group of people that came here 133,000 years ago. They were the people that formed the society of Atlantis and Lemuria. There was another group that came here 150,000 years ago that formed a worldwide society that was headed by a man named Pelagon. Both of these societies fell. Both of these societies destroyed themselves and almost destroyed the planet. Now, our society is also heading down the same path. And I want to get to that a little bit later in the show. And we'll talk about this a little bit more. And I think I will see if my guest is ready to come on. She may not be ready. We'll see. I just talk forever about this stuff. To me, it's so interesting. Okay, I'm gonna drag her in and see if she can join us. Anyway, we're talking about reincarnation. We're talking about the spirit form of most human beings here on the earth is about 4.5 million years old. And there are some that came here in the past on ships and they died and they entered into the reincarnational patterns of earth. And they have 8 to 12 million year old spirit forms. And a lot of times they kind of want to yell and scream a lot because of a crazy society. So let me Solaris, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. I haven't talked to you in probably months.
I know. It's been a while, huh?
You've been quite busy, and I know you've had me on your show several times to talk about the Maya information. And reincarnation is one of my favorite topics. There's so much to learn about it in the Maya information. And, different, Meyer has a specific point of view on this kind of thing. Other people may have a different take on it. But when you look at what's going on in the world, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the prophecies tonight too. I kind of went through that in a slightly different way. But according to the Meyer information, people will a lot of times ask me, well, why Billy Meyer? Why him? Who is this guy? Well, and to answer that question, I have to talk about his spirit form. Because the Meyer information says his spirit form is like 9.6 billion years old. That means that was before there was an Earth. And he was reincarnating before there was even an Earth, which is totally incredible to try to wrap your mind around. Don't you agree?
Right. But when you look at who we are as star beings, our essence of origin is very ancient. So, I'm estimating about 26 billion years beyond, because when you're looking at who you are as a celestial, insofar as your cellular design, it's in essence, it's an extension of the cosmic design, which is very ancient. So you have to put that in perspective. That's just my own 2 cents. But yeah. And of course, we bring that with us, too. We bring that database of information. So sounds like his particular essence of origin stood out.
Right. Billy, they call him the universal prophet, and according to Meyer information, and there's no way for me to actually prove this, but they say his spirit form incarnated as Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, a person they call Emmanuel, Muhammad. He also incarnated earlier as people like Aristotle, Socrates, Mozart, Galileo, to name a few. So they call him the universal prophet because when he incarnates, he's here to positively influence the conscious evolution on the planet. At least that's what the Meyer. It's interesting that he could incarnate as a musician and do that. To positively influence people's awareness, because when I look at our society, it almost looks like we're degenerating. Have you noticed that?
Oh gosh, it's pathetic. Yeah, it's very. I don't have words for it. Mark, I really don't have words for it at this point in the continuum. I think there's something really serious happening here with the evolution of mankind, and I see the looping program that keeps going on and on and on. It's the recycling and regurgitating of old programs, old behavioral patterns, and most of it stems from social engineering, and we've touched on that before, but that's what I see, and I don't see them breaking the paradigm. I really don't. I think those of us who are switched on are going to stay switched on, and the rest, I have no idea.
Now, you said something interesting there. You said looping. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, like repeating?
Well, it's just like it's self-replicating programming. Literally, it's just like the same thing over and over and over again. They never break orbit with that same strand of energy or transmission. Then they don't know how to navigate to a higher spectrum because they're not doing any spiritual work, in my opinion. They're not looking above and beyond the spectrum of what's going on in their orbits to evolve past where they're at. And and it's the same old recycling programming. And I do blame, I'd like to point swords and fingers at certain organizations throughout the centuries. I can go after, corporations in the guise of religion.
Well,
it's the same thing. That has really halted the evolution of mankind, truly.
Well, we'll get to that. That kind of leads into some other topics, but I wanted to ask you about the colleges now. What do you think about this?
What college?
Well, all of them are. There's this weird propaganda now where it's almost like the youth is being radicalized.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's sad because I understand being anti-established. I get that. You want to be a free spirit, but these people are not being free spirits. They're being programmed and socially engineered by an agenda, and they're actually losing their freedom. So it is concerning, but you know what? We're not going to be here 50, 100 years from now, and I don't know what is, quite honestly, or what kind of genetic mutation is going to happen in the process.
Well, what about the social justice warriors now?
Oh, brother. Yeah, don't get me started with them. Excuse me. Yeah, there's just a lot of weird going on. And, they don't know what they're doing. They don't understand a whole lot. It's monkey see, monkey do. And
do you think
doesn't
they're
work.
like programmed?
I think there's a lot of that going on. The social engineering, which came from mainstream media, it comes from Hollywood, it comes from the entertainment industry, it comes from their idols, it comes from people who were there as their role models, who instead of having their parents around, they look to someone else who literally has no moral compass. And that's a lot of that is the entertainment industry, to be honest with you. You see it all the time. And now everybody's following, like goose steps across the board here. I predicted this 2 years ago, and it's weird. Yeah, in my Eye of the Remote series after I was pulled into that program. So I mean, it's interesting to watch this stuff coming out, and it's interesting to see what mankind is doing behind the scenery. Another thing that really concerns me, Mark, is that the people seem very hate-oriented. They're very impulse-oriented. They don't know how to just shadow themselves and step out of the conflict. They want to sit there and argue against each other. I just saw this. I'm sure you probably saw this footage. Some guy who kills another guy at the trash can. I mean, literally because of garbage incident. So that's worth killing your neighbor. I mean, the stuff that's happening here is irrational. It's insanity. Okay, this is insane behavior, and I'm seeing it more and more and more and more. I'll send you the article. There's a video out there. It's very concerning to watch that kind of they don't care. There's no consequences, right? It's just like it's okay. You can do this. You can do that. You can take somebody out. It's okay. There's no consequence. There is a consequence. There's a universal consequence. But yeah, it's really strange. This is like the Wild West on, I don't know what kind of crack, but very strange world. And poor Billy Meyer, not poor Billy Meyer, but you know what I mean? He's working on a philosophical consciousness level, and a lot of people get the information, but most people don't take the time to read anything philosophical or educational. They're not going to look behind that or beyond it.
No, it's interesting that you said irrational, and then you brought up this example because in the very beginning of Billy's book called The Mind of Thoughts, there's a lady named Elizabeth Moosberger who wrote in 1997. She was the wife of the fellow that wrote the original book, and I think it's called "And Still They Fly." It's up in my.
Oh, I've heard that. Yeah, I remember you telling me about that.
Yeah. He was a close friend of Billy. He actually saw some of the extraterrestrials. He saw some of the ships, and he wrote the first real good book on this whole thing. And I think his wife outlived him, but she commented in the beginning of this book, and she said, "So the book which lies before you is dedicated to humankind which is ill in its consciousness, so that it again finds the creational natural way, which it lost a long time ago." So you just made me think of that when you were talking about. So this fellow just murdered his neighbor.
Yeah, over a garbage incident, over some kind of a mattress or something left at the trash.
Was
I mean,
it
this is what I
filmed?
mean by, yeah, it's on film. You can access it. Anybody can access it on YouTube. They might even put it in the chat. But I was like, I couldn't believe that people just don't have any self-control. In the old days, people would have conflict. They'd walk away, cool off, whatever.
Right.
There's none of that going on anymore. It's literally, I don't like what you say. You're done. Here's my, they're going to take each other out. It's insanity. It really is. And I have to tell you, if that's where they're at in consciousness, they're not going anywhere when they die. They're not going to be able to get a green card someplace else or a free pass someplace in the multiverse. It's just not going to happen. And that's what concerns me about the evolution of mankind, Mark, is because there's only a small percentage of people here, regardless of their religion or their belief systems, that are really switched on and ascended in consciousness. They're going to make it. The rest, you can't help them. You can't help them, okay? And I think people need to just come to terms with that. We can't help some of these people, and I'm not about to. I think I've done more than enough over the years. So, and I don't want to sound selfish, but man, you know what? They don't want help. They don't want assistance. They just want to live the world of craziness and chaos. And that goes for these kids that are graduating in college. And their agenda, they're going to regret every single thing they're doing.
A lot of the people that are in college now, they're very victim oriented. They think of themselves as victims, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know what they've been victimized by, because, if they want to play the victim, I've been through warfare programs and I still don't play the victim. I just call it out. So, yeah, it's very interesting for me to see and observe how people have been coddled over the years to such a level. And I think this has a lot to do with the way they've been raised and how they were never disciplined and how there was no type of structure. Because if there was, this wouldn't be going on today. So,
what do you think about the Trump derangement syndrome, where people hate Trump so bad they literally
well, that's
get
complete
crazy?
social engineering. That's a complete programming. I can't get over how many people are consumed by it. Whether you love him or hate him, it's the rationale behind it. Once again, there is no rationale. It's insanity. There are a lot of people I didn't like in office years ago, and you knew that because they were committing treason, and we knew it. But
Right.
this stuff is just crazy. The stuff that's going on right now. And then once again, it's a byproduct of going with the flow of the herd, not questioning, just following the herd, following the mainstream media, following the propaganda, and not doing the research enough to understand what's beyond it all, which is very sad.
And isn't it interesting to watch this progress? It's progressed so far in such a
It's
short
getting
time.
violent. It's volatile. It's spiking up, and I don't see anything de-escalating. Let's put it that way.
That's very, very interesting. It kind of leads right into the next part of the show. And what I did, and I probably talked about this a little bit on your show before. There's one of Billy's contact reports called Contact Report 215, and it really talks about the coming civil wars and a whole series of bad events. And what I did is I simplified this and broke it down, because I think when people read it, it's so much, it's hard to even wrap your mind around it. You just kind of go numb and you don't really appreciate what it's saying. So this is what Billy has said. First of all, in line 208 of Contact Report 215, he says, civilization will collapse. Now, I've read it, but because there's a whole bunch of other stuff he says in that line, I kind of forget the significance of that. He's telling us our civilization will collapse. He says, too, there will be civil war in Spain, Russia, and Sweden. Number 3, conditions will be similar to civil war in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. 4, he says there will be civil war in Germany. Number 5, and this blew me away because I've read this many times, but it never really sunk in. He says Russia will attack the state of Alaska and Canada, and this will lead to a conflict between U.S. and Russia. The U.S. and Canada will fight against Russia. That's what I'm assuming. And then he says, nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons will be used en masse. Now, en masse, what he means here is, keep in mind, en masse means to group. Mm-hmm. In other words, these weapons will be used at the same time, all together. Mm-hmm. Now, here's something we've seen, and I think you and I have talked about this before. Rolling walls of fire, incredible fires, and violent hurricanes will rage across the U.S. I mean, you even had one of these raging fires that came into Colorado, and you had to leave for a while, didn't you?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think Deborah Tavares has done a really good job about the weaponization of those. Even some things that could be correlating with smart meters and other types of directed energy weapons that are escalating or making these fires worse than they normally would be. And even the firemen are commenting on that there's something wrong, that these aren't the average fire. They're harder to put out. They burn really hot. It's just way different. This is definitely a weaponization of our environment, if you ask me. And, I've been ready to do a presentation on it, too, called the weaponization of the biodome, which I'm going to be doing.
Really?
So that's going to be coming up at Stargate to the Cosmos. So I'm going to be talking about some of this stuff and some of the other things they're doing with black satellite technology programs. So, yeah, there's a lot happening. And that's the problem, is that while people are fighting amongst themselves and having all these race wars and this war and that war, there's this big arena going on in our biodome that literally is weaponized. It's just like, it's hovering over everybody's heads and nobody's paying attention. A lot of people are, but not the people that should be.
The magnitude, these fires are gigantic. I mean, these are record-setting fires. And now we're starting to see the hurricanes, right? Right.
Now it's just everything. And even electromagnetic pulse weapons, we talked about this years and years ago with earthquakes and other things that are being, basically, they're pushing the event insofar as escalating it and amplifying the situation to a point where they're inducing an earthquake, or they're inducing a type of a warfare program that's going to be very, very negative for mankind. So, This is only the beginning. This is it. And the thing is, the final war zone is really the technological war. That's the one we're fighting right now. We're fighting a technology war. Whether it's on the internet, where it's censorship, or whether it's through the biodome, where they're weaponizing everything, it's technology that's being misused and abused and used to control, manipulate the masses, right down to brainwave activity.
Yeah, Alex Jones has been censored now, right?
Yeah, PayPal just got him. I mean, he's been completely removed. I mean, like I said, that's the beginning of censorship.
Total censorship.
Yeah, that to me. I think he has a lawsuit against the PayPal. I'm not sure about that. I understand where they're coming from.
Lawsuits.
They're calling it a hate this and hate that, but I don't think they can get away with that. I just don't. So I think that could be a problem for them down the road. But what I also see is that people are showing their colors right now, and that what's going to happen is the new platforms are going to come up, and all these people that are in control right now with a lot of money are going to go, because they're going to be basically obsolete. If they want to play that game of censorship, there's always going to be a bigger monster on the block. I've told you guys this before. It may not be a monster, but somebody else who's a competitor to say, hey, I'll take over. I'll do this, and I'll attract that. And, hasta la vista to everybody else.
Well, I wanted to bring up something here. You were talking about hate speech. And, see, I have a completely different point of view. I think it's good to hate certain things. Like, I hate child abuse. I hate the abuse of animals. I hate the destruction of nature.
Right.
I hate the neglect of children and animals. I hate homelessness. I could go on and on.
Right.
Why is it wrong to have hate? I mean,
well, that's what they're using as a platform of control. Though right now they're saying if anybody speaks up against another party, or if anybody speaks up with their own perception of reality, or their spirit, freedom of speech, whatever you want to call it, patriots, then they will be automatically associated as hate speech, which I don't understand. It's a psychological warfare program. They're using words as a weapon against each other. And for whatever reason, hate speech seems to be the big deal right now. But you know what? I'm not putting up with it. And you know what? If you're honest and you're true, good. Hold your ground and be that pillar of light, in my opinion. That's what I am. So, but this whole idea about this is what I mean by a coddled society. They can't handle the truth, so it's hate speech. Oh, you're telling the truth, so therefore, that's hate speech. I'm sick and tired of it. Quite honestly, it's illiterate people that are doing these games, and it needs to stop. Honestly, I am so burned out, Mark. You have no idea how burned out I am. Seriously, you have no idea.
Well, I hate war. I hate poverty. I hate disease. I hate overpopulation. Since when is it? I mean, there are certain things you should hate if you're normal, right?
Well, I go beyond the word of hate. I don't use that terminology. There are things I don't approve. Enraged, I guess, is a word. It goes beyond hate. Hate is just an emotion, but this is beyond all that. It's a moral compass is what we have. We know right from wrong, bottom line. What you're describing is right from wrong. So We don't approve for that. That's not correct, or approve of that. That's not correct behavior. That sort of thing. The problem is that people are actually not. Their behavior mechanisms are off. It's as if they've been so
Right.
programmed that they don't understand right from wrong anymore. Everything's a gray line. There's no in between the spaces of understanding right or left hemisphere or consciousness. So it's very interesting to watch, and they are. It seems like they're going backwards and reverse. They're not evolving. They're not ascending in consciousness, not at all.
We've heard a lot of talk about gun control. But if they're really worried about people dying, let's look at prescription drugs. Do you know that 300,000 to 400,000 people die every year from prescription drugs that they got legally from a doctor?
Mm-hmm. And most of it's not even necessary. Most of it's, a placebo.
Yeah, exactly. Most of it,
Yep.
yeah. I mean, it's why not go after that problem? I mean, a lot more people are dying.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you on that. Well, that's a moneymaker too. That's big pharma.
So they're
once
not
again,
going to attack that, right?
No, they're
because of
not.
the
But
money.
what's interesting? Guns are just, in my opinion, they don't work on certain levels. I mean, it's going to get way beyond the illusion of guns. The new weapon and the new kid on the block, as I've touched on, is the Black Satellite program and the type of warfare program I was subjected to. That's the new kid on the block. The regular weapon systems are not going to be good enough. And what I'm seeing also is a very malicious sociopathic side to a lot of these big organizations where they like to make people suffer. They don't want to just kill people. They want to slow kill, slow bleed. And I think that's why the technology is more appealing, because it is a slow kill when they misuse it.
That is gruesome.
It is gruesome, but this is the world we're living right now. And what I can tell people out there, if you're computer savvy and you're very technologically aware, be very, very fortified on all levels.
Let me continue on Contact
Okay.
Report 215. It says here, America's largest cities will be absolutely destroyed. That hasn't happened yet, but what if he's right? It says tornadoes, earthquakes, floods, snowstorms, volcanic eruptions will occur all over the world, and they will become increasingly more devastating in the future. Mm-hmm. He also said, and this was huge, if you literally pay attention, man will destroy the entire environment, all of nature.
Mm-hmm.
Astonishing.
Yes, care. Yeah.
Billy says, a shifting of weight inside the earth will take place. And what he's talking about here is the how we've dammed up rivers and created lakes, and how we've taken so much petroleum out of the earth, and how we've used atomic explosions. Let me continue this. It says here, a shifting of weight inside the earth will take place. And because of that, in part, increasingly horrible floods will occur, unusually massive snowfalls, and that the earth, which it already has started to do this, will begin to spin strangely as a consequence of atomic explosions inside the earth and on the surface of the earth. And because of this strange spinning of the earth, there will be a new ice age that starts to come in. And then the last thing, the thing I stopped with, I don't like to harp on this stuff too much, but the two terrible civil wars that will break out in America, which is coming. So,
right. Yeah, it is coming. And I think you're going to see more and more of it when President Trump leaves office. That's going to be very, very intense, because he's been stabilizing this for now. But
just for now, yeah.
Yeah, and I look and I see so much strategic maneuvering going on right now behind the scenes. It's very concerning. Yeah, it's not going to be pretty, in my opinion. By 2022, I think we're in for a big ride.
So what do you think of like CNN and MSNBC and?
I don't watch them. And basically it's propaganda. The saddest part of all, they don't want to take responsibility for starting the propaganda, but they certainly did when prior to the election of President Trump. I mean, they were running all kinds of lies and literally spinning everything with a hate program running. I mean, that was the hate crime right there. They were literally spinning propaganda out of control, and yet they don't want to take responsibility for the aftermath of what's happening right now in America. Well, let me tell you something. People wouldn't be acting up the way they are right now if they weren't spinning that propaganda when President Trump was running for office. I can use that as a perfect example. So yeah, I don't. I think there should be accountability with those people. There's no doubt about it. But it's just one vicious cycle, and I have to ask myself, they're not going to benefit down the road. Whether President Trump's in there or not, they're still screwed. So I don't understand what their problem is. I really don't. They're not hurting for meals. They're not hurting for their money. These people don't suffer in a former dimensional space. There's no reason for them to be acting out, just like Hollywood. They're flipping out in Hollywood. What do they have to be complaining about? Seriously. They have billion dollar homes. What the hell do they have to be complaining about with the president? I don't understand it. I really don't. They don't count their blessings. They're spoiled brats. And I think the problem is they've been overpaid in those industries for a very long time and coddled to such a level that they think they're the privileged, they're the so-called royalty, and they're no royalty. They're just overpaid entertainers. So I see a lot of problems here. I really do. I don't know how it's going to get cleared up.
Part of it, I look at a person like Hillary Clinton and the corruption, and for example, Mena, Arkansas, when her and Bill were bringing drugs into the country from South America, most likely for our own CIA. Mm-hmm. And that sounds so insane to some people, but they don't do the homework. They don't realize that they haven't read the books. They haven't been paying attention. Right. So
yeah, they're calibrated. They've been living inside the machine, so they don't understand anything. They really don't. They're completely consumed by the program.
Now, it's interesting that you use the term living inside the machine. Can you elaborate on that at all?
Well, it's just the programming. Everything here, in my opinion, is a construct and a program. And whether it's through a communication system, like what I was subjected to, or social engineering, they're living inside a false construct. And they don't know the difference because they haven't been outside of it. And the only people that do know are the people that are awakened on a higher level of consciousness, who have broken beyond the barrier. So, that's how we can look out. We are the spy birds. We can see things from outside and look on and see what's going on here on the timeline. And to me, this world is a machine. I mean, literally, it's a living intelligence, but it's not being treated as such. If people would leave this world alone, I'm pretty sure it knows how to regenerate. I'm pretty sure of that. So, just like we do. If you leave us alone, we know how to heal too in consciousness. We can heal our bodies on many levels if we weren't being completely, eradicated with toxicity.
Now, you talked about looking over a timeline. And that's very interesting. And that again brings me back somewhat to reincarnation, if you don't mind me kind of going back into that a little bit. Mm-hmm. Because evolutive values, for example, are timeless. Values like love, wisdom, harmony, these are what the spirit form. In Billy's third contact, a woman named similiar said that every human has a spirit form that never dies, that never sleeps, that records everything that he thinks, all of his impulsations, and it will tell you if your thinking is right or wrong if you've learned to pay attention to it. She called it the wonder of all wonders. And the spirit form comes again when the child is born at 21 days. It's not born yet. It's 21 days old. The spirit form comes in from the spirit realm, and it brings with it the consciousness, the subconscious mind, the conscious mind, and the unconscious mind. And what happens during this reincarnational process, which is really interesting, is that we get a new personality each reincarnation, so that's unburdened by the past. So we do not fall into the same patterns. So it's the spirit form that reincarnates. The material consciousness is new. So the essences of the programs of what level you evolved up to your previous life is programmed into your subconsciousness. So, for example, the new personality starts out where the old personality left off in terms of the consciousness evolution. Now, it's subconscious because the child can't even speak, but programmed into its subconsciousness is love, honesty, respect, patience, diligence, humor, and things like that. So I just wanted to, yeah.
No, that's a good point you make. Well, once again, that's an extension of source, because, I call it entering onto a timeline. I don't even call it reincarnation, because to me, it's like we're infinite beings. We're here in a matrix in a biosuit, and we enter onto a timeline, and that is part of our well, I guess you could call it a personality to some degree, but that's the way I see it. But it's the same concept of what you're talking about. But it's pure energy, pure light, pure love. It's what you were saying. And when we enter onto this timeline, we experience a lot of things that aren't so kind. And of course, the personality develops over the years through that type of experience, and goes and processes the data in what we call, to me, it's like the great full Akashic. But it is interesting that people don't seem to have an awareness of what's really going on that level of consciousness in the psyche and the subconscious mind, and how that operates and functions.
The other interesting thing is, and this is a slightly different topic, but it relates to reincarnation. What happens because of overpopulation? And for example, ideally, let's say you and I, we lived 100 years before we died. Now, the way nature has this set up is that when the spirit form leaves the body and takes the consciousness with it, we're supposed to spend time and a half in the spirit realm. For example, if you lived 100 years, you would spend 152 years processing the information from your last life. And then that allows you to form the evolutive values of everything that you learned. Your spirit form can absorb that. Your new subconscious can be programmed with the evolutive values, and your new personality has enough time to form. But because of overpopulation, at least the Maya information says, that the spirit form gets pulled out of the spirit realm too soon because of overpopulation. And there's not enough time to program the next personality. This leads to people being unstable. It leads to people more likely becoming addicted. It leads to people needing more support from their parents. It also makes it more difficult for a masculine personality to form. And the Maya information says the cycles don't return to normal, because one of the bad things that happens is that too many spirit forms get activated. I know this is wild.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting? That we're supposed to have 129 billion spirit forms that have been activated, and they're in this what they call the fine matter world around our planet. And this would be a spirit form that's had at least one incarnation. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense insofar as the spirit forms go, but also you have to factor in, and I don't know if Billy's ever done that, is the weaponization of our world with technology and a digitized space. The digitized space is actually overlaying the spirit world, which means it's becoming weaponized, and that's putting a distortion on spirit insofar as the way people are perceiving spirit. So that's a whole different formula altogether, and I know he probably hasn't touched on that, but it is part of what's happening here in this world, because we are dealing with a morphing process of technology overlaying and interfering with spiritual evolution. So that is something to factor in.
Well, he talks, I don't really want to cover this tonight so much, but
Okay.
We could.
No, it's okay. It's your show. I'm
It's
just
called the
chiming in
Deep
here.
Space Platform. I think I got a message from, somebody's trying to call in to the show. We get a message from the chat room. How burnt out are you? Toasted, carbonized. I don't know. It's a strange message.
I don't know, but if you better not be a troll towards me, you won't last long.
Oh, don't do that, folks. Believe me.
Yes, believe me.
You will be sorry. I guarantee you.
There's a dragon in me.
Right. Okay.
And I have fire.
Yes, indeed. So I just thought I would share that.
Okay.
The Deep Space Platform. It's Figu Bulletin number 2. Billy says there is a whole satellite system around the Earth. They can see everything. They can literally see everything that's happening on the Earth. But that is a very, very interesting study because it was built in part by Grumman. They can view every square meter.
Oh, they're insidious. Not only can they view everything, they can interfere with people on a bioelectric level and interfere with brainwave activity.
I have no doubt.
That's part of what happened. Well, I'm not going to get into that, but there are some things going on with the Black Satellite program that I think are being looked at. Let's put it that way. But that's been the culprit behind it all. It's not God. It's not a demon. It's not a ghost. It's mankind and the Black Satellite projects and a lot of things that have been running discreetly behind the scenes that have been controlling and manipulating mankind for a very long time. And it's all through frequency.
You know, it's very interesting. People do blame a lot on demons and on negative
That's
evil
superstition.
spirit.
Anyway, you look at it. That's the superstitious response, excuse me, because that's, it's always the devil. If somebody looks funny or acts funny, oh, it's this, it's that. They don't look into the science, and that's their weakness.
One of these days, do you ever use the chat room?
I hardly go in there unless it's my show, and then I'll poke my head in.
Okay.
Why? You have a bunch of clowns in there?
No. I'm just getting messages, but it's secondhand through Skype. I usually don't get too many messages.
Oh, that's all right.
But anyway.
It's probably because I'm here, Mark.
Probably is. I have no doubt.
I'm just so loved, That's
You are.
I just trigger so many people.
Trigger. That's an interesting word. Trigger. But one step outside of reincarnation is the evolutionary steps, and it's kind of related to reincarnation. And I'm going to relate this hopefully into the Might of Thoughts, which is the book that I spend most of my time in. With. We have 7 evolutionary steps. The first stage is primitive. The second stage is rational life. Believe it or not, most of the people on the earth are in what's called rational life. It's amazing to think about that, because there's so much irrationality still. But the Maya information says that we have the ability for rational life. We are in the rational life stage. The third stage of evolution is intelligent life. A few people have moved into that area. Authors, maybe people that are in engineering fields or science, or just a small percentage of the population starting to move into intelligent life. The fourth stage of evolution, of reincarnation, if you will, is what's called real life. And in real life, we can start to do amazing things. Societies become true space travelers. They can jump from star to star with almost no time passing. They become incredible genetic engineers, and they build artificial intelligence. For example, Semyase, Billy's third contact, had a beam ship. And within her beam ship, there was an intelligence which was biological. The central computer of the ship was biological. It was sentient. It was aware. It was a created thing that the player created. And Semyase could have telepathic communication. So her ship, essentially, was a living being with a metallic hull. This is the fourth stage of evolution. Now, in the fifth stage of evolution, it's called life and creational wisdom. And at this level, the extraterrestrials, the people at this level, are supposed to be able to do incredible things with their minds, with like telekinesis, teleportation, telepathy, of course. Now, and there was an extraterrestrial on the Earth about 150,000 years ago who headed a civilization. His name was Pelagon. And I think I remember reading in various places in the Maya material that he could cause plants to grow with his mind. He would often he would literally could be floating around with the power of his mind. Incredible things. He was the leader of that society on the earth 150,000 years ago. He was very benevolent to the people of Earth. So this is what's called the stage of the King of Wisdom. And this was called Ishwish in the ancient past. JHWH is sometimes how it was abbreviated. Now, unfortunately, in the ancient past, these people got confused with the word God. So this is where the whole idea of the personified God came in. It was actually a confusion between these kings of wisdom in the fifth stage. Now, in the sixth stage of evolution, again, this is the Maya material. I'm not trying to force anyone to believe this. But in the sixth stage of evolution, we lose the need for the physical body, and we are literally half spiritual, half physical beings. And then in the final stage, we're back as spirit forms. And during that stage, which lasts like several billion years, we actually merge back with creation itself.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what the Maya material says about it. You know, people have different points of view, different perspectives.
Well, it's a nice philosophy, and I think there's some I don't want to say truth in a sense, but to me, it's all aspects of who we really are on an ascension wave. Literally. So it's many levels to our evolution. Is what it sounds like he's describing to some degree.
Right, exactly.
So all those capabilities. I mean, we are naturally telepathic. I know that for a fact. I can interface with machines. I know that for a fact. I mean, there are things we can do naturally here on the timeline, but the problem is we're being interfered with. And as long as the interference program is being run, which has a lot to do with the Black Warfare Department, black satellites, we are never going to be able to get to that level we want to be until those things are disabled. And also what I would call a reorganization of the world, because we need to literally take down all these programs. All these centuries of programs need to be taken down and reconstructed at the consciousness level, pure light, pure energy. And honestly, do you think that can happen? I'm telling you point blank, we have to just pretty much be our own beings and keep ascending, and the right beings will keep ascending. And I don't know what's going to happen to the rest. I really don't. I'm not trying to sound cynical, but I'm just looking at it at a very logical and spiritual level. That there's some big stuff that needs to change here, and it's not changing. So it's interesting how he's called a lot of that out already. And what's really interesting to me is I'm not sure if he gave you a timeline for some of the things going on with Russia and Alaska and Canada, but it would be interesting to find out what timeline he was looking at, what year.
Well, he's saying by 2020, the government
well, that's here, yeah. Well.
of the U.S., it's 2 years, right? Or even
right.
half.
Well, don't look for Trudeau to help. I mean, forget that. Canada's out. They're no backup for us.
Yeah, right.
Seriously, we might as well just say hasta la vista. You have great beer, you used to, but don't even look for them. Seriously,
It'll be interesting to see how that all pans out.
Well,
I'm hoping
they want to snuff out the light. Unfortunately, America was the beacon. It was the beacon of light. It really was the role model for the rest of the world. They've been jealous of it, envious of it. They've infiltrated it. Now they're trying to take it down from the inside out. We've got the EU and the UN that never going to back down. We've got so many enemies that are literally not here to support on a global scale where we're all working together on a higher level of consciousness, but it's basically a monopoly war. Who wants to privatize space? Who wants to privatize this? I'm so tired of it. People are going to have to struggle for water. I mean, I'm not a fearmonger. I'm just telling you, you know this. We're in situations right now that are absolutely insane, and nobody seems to be getting it, So, I mean, for me, I would be off planet in a heartbeat. I told you this before. The only way out, in my opinion, is up. The only way out is to get out of here and break orbit with this place, because this place is like a hellhole to me. This place to me is worse than any hell mankind can. I mean, any hell that people can even perceive of is right here, right now. There's no doubt about it.
I recently heard there was a lady, I don't know where she was. I don't know if she was in Florida or on the West Coast, but she went into a McDonald's somewhere, and none of the employees spoke English.
Oh, right. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, and they were giving her a hard time. Yeah.
They were giving her a big hard time. Mm-hmm. And she was like, wait a minute, I know if I say the number, you guys know which meal it is. She says, I don't know what she was saying. I want a number 3 or whatever.
There's an awful lot of that going on right now. A lot of resentment, a lot of anger, a lot of rage. And it's really inexcusable and unacceptable, bottom line. I don't care what color you are, what race you are. It's just not acceptable behavior. People need to learn to coexist. They used to be able to coexist years and years and years. We had no problems with this. Maybe they were. I never saw them. But now it's all over the map. Now these kids are acting out, and they think it's cool to do so because social media is filming. But they look like idiots, and all they're doing is keep leaving a benchmark and a time capsule on the internet of their behavior, which, of course, is infinite because there are so many ghost records on the internet that it's not even funny. So
I don't think we're going to get a break today. We're supposed to have already started, I would assume.
Oh, on you? I'm not sure. Do you want me to check and listen?
You can listen.
I can mute and check. Why don't you talk and I'll see if I can hear anything.
I'll continue. So we were talking about reincarnation a bit earlier, and I wanted to also point out the difference between the material consciousness and the spiritual consciousness. See, according to my information, your spirit form is not able to think creatively. The spirit form is not completely conscious. Now, this is strange, I think. It says the spirit form, it also has no ego. It only wants to gather the purest information. and it processes information that it receives from the material consciousness block. So there's a big difference between your material consciousness, which is who you are in this lifetime, and the spirit form. Solaris, did you come back? I think she's out there still.
No, I'm here. I'm actually listening, and you're still talking. So there's kind of like a delay, but no, there's no break. Not yet, anyway.
No, I don't think there is a break. So I think we just flow on with it.
Yeah, it's fine. If I start to hear something, I'll let you know.
Okay, fantastic.
Oh, there it is.
Well, there you go. We'll be back, folks. Take a 5-minute break. See you in a bit.
Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message. Revolution Radio.
You don't see it, do you? How close we are to absolute chaos? The sick ones are sitting on their fat asses, eating and drink themselves into a stupor, polluting the world without a second thought while it goes down the toilet. Nobody wants to do the nasty work. You know, the shit that we all just think about. Most good citizens are just along for the ride and then bitch and moan and complain about everything when it doesn't work out. Not me. Get it done.
Revolution Radio, where we do the nasty work. www.freedomslips.com.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all! See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even constantly take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it.
Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
football program usually heard at this time will be momentarily delayed for a special broadcast.
Prepare yourself for a trip through time, space, and the reality that you have known. When you enter into Willow's world. Willow Andreasen brings you the thought-provoking dialogue and news from around the world that shows your mind has no limitations. Take it away, Willow.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the second hour of Ohio Exopolitics. I want to thank Solaris for joining us in the first hour. In the last hour here, we're going to talk about the might of thoughts, the creation, the psyche, the Talmud of Emmanuel, and the New World Order. So this is a lot of interesting. There's, Billy's has a book here. It's called The Might of Thoughts, which is, to me, one of his most challenging books to understand. And I'm going to go over this a little bit. And it's on page 52 here. It says, as a rule, suffering is always an effect of some form of wrong thinking if the suffering relates to negative, bad, or evil outcomes. In this form, incidents of suffering are indicators that the law of harmony is disregarded and broken, and that therefore one is therefore not living according to the law of being, which is directed at progress, love, peace, knowledge, wisdom, joy, and true inner freedom. So what we're being taught here is to think in neutral positive ways. Neutral positive means that you're kind of neutral, but a little bit to the positive. That puts you in a state of mind where you're confident, you're optimistic, you're relaxed, you're cheerful, you're enthusiastic. And when you're in that frame of mind, you're fulfilling the law of harmony. If you get out of that frame of mind, what comes in, as a rule, is suffering. So if you think in negative terms, negative thoughts will produce negative outcomes in your life. Now, when we're between 1 and 7 years old, we are being programmed. Literally, our subconscious is being programmed by the world around us, by our parents. And Dr. Bruce Lipton talks about us being in a theta state from years 1 through 7. We're in a theta state, and we're literally absorbing constantly, and we absorb a tremendous amount of negativity at this time. So what we have to do as adults is reprogram the subconscious. And in order to do that, you have to repeat to yourself things like, for example, this here is what I repeat to myself a lot. I'm confident, I'm optimistic, I'm relaxed, I'm cheerful, I'm enthusiastic, I persevere, I persist, I endure, I am calm, I'm in harmony, I do not allow my thoughts to drift, I steer my thoughts like a captain steers his ship, I strengthen my thoughts, I nurture my thoughts, I make them more purposeful and valuable to me. I'm the forger of my own fortune. I'm the creator of my own good luck. It is the nature of your thoughts that by their might alone, every conceivable thing can be brought to fruition. And the law of creation says that your thoughts will have an effect. And the effect of your thoughts is directly proportional to their might and power. So the more powerful your thoughts, the more effect that they will have. So if you have very powerful negative thoughts, you can bring about terrible circumstances in your life. So we have a ton of negative programming in our subconscious. So we have to reprogram the subconscious. And there are more than one ways to do that, but the easiest way is through repetition. So I urge people to come up with their neutral positive repetition that works for them, whatever that is. Because your body is said to be plastic, and the body is said to react without intervening time or space to your thoughts. Now, your thoughts, which are nurtured, and to nurture your thoughts means to encourage the growth and development of your thoughts. And you want to develop habitual neutral positive thinking because you already have habitual negative thinking. It's a part of everyone. And old habits are hard to break. So what we're going to be doing is repeating neutral positive thoughts like I am confident, I'm optimistic, I'm relaxed, I'm cheerful. If you think back through your day to day, I guarantee you have thought a negative thought. When you think a negative thought, it triggers a feeling, and the feelings come from your thoughts. So look at your feelings, look back over the day to day, and think about where you had a thought that triggered a negative feeling. When you did that, you damaged your consciousness a little bit. And the more often you think those negative thoughts, which trigger the negative feelings, the more you will damage your consciousness. So what we want to do is create behavioral patterns of neutral positive thoughts and imprint them on our neural pathways. And the neural pathways are tiny gaps in the pathways. They're a connection in our brain called the synapse. And for us to learn something new, an electrical signal has to jump across that synapse. Now, I guarantee that you have programming in your subconscious mind and in your conscious mind too. And that's when it's really bad. And if you've noticed that, if you've caught yourself thinking negative thoughts over and over and over and over again, and reacting over in a cycle, I think Solaris called it looping, and you're repeating the negative thoughts, and it's generating a negative feeling, and eventually it becomes a habit, and you can't stop it. It's a very dangerous thing. So you've got to learn to control those negative thoughts. And you want to strengthen the synapses in your brain with neutral positive thoughts. This is called long-term potentiation. This is the strengthening of your synapses. So you'll start to learn to control your thoughts. And Aristotle once commented on the importance of repetition in education. And he said, it is the frequent repetition that produces a natural tendency. Who was Aristotle according to the Meyer Information, same spirit form that's in Switzerland right now, in Hinterschmidt-Ruti, same spirit form. It's the frequent repetition that produces a natural tendency. And there's a direct relationship between long-term potentiation and repetition. So the human being learns through constant repetition, like drops of water making a hole in a stone, and the drops hammer and hammer through repetition, and that's the way you imprint neutral positive thoughts into your mind, and repetition, and that leads to practical experience, living experience, know-how. It leads to wisdom. So, for example, in the book The Psyche, it talks about how you should study the Meyer Materia, and it says repetition, reading things aloud, repeating them, memorization to a degree. Only through constant repetition of a thing can knowledge be produced. The human being is able to comprehend when the repetition occurs. That's what strengthens your thoughts. You clarify your thoughts when you repeat. So do not nurture the wrong thoughts. Do not nurture pessimistic, wrong, sick, bad, and negative thoughts. For example, some examples of bad things, bad thoughts: impatience and lack of contentment. And those can lead to anger. And anger can lead to cancer. People with cancer, not always, I'm not saying that always, but a lot of times anger and hate produce cancer. That's how powerful your thoughts are. Let me read a little bit. This comes from an article out on the future of mankind, so I call it Impatience and Uncontentment Lead to Hate and Anger. Billy says here, impatience and uncontentment are two of the great enemies of the human being, which prevent and destroy both his or her inner peace and his or her freedom and harmony. If the building up of these values is prevented, or they are destroyed, then also the purely thought, feeling-based love, as well as the goodness and dignity, are affected by it. That is to say, prevented and destroyed. If these high values do not exist purely in a spiritual, fine feeling-based form, rather only in a thought, feeling-based form or structure, then they irrevocably become subject to prevention or destruction. It must be understood from this that love, peace, freedom, harmony, as well as goodness, dignity, are of effective correctness and of lasting, indestructible value. One of the things that helped my thinking, even before I knew anything about the Might of Thoughts, before I started reading the book, The Might of Thoughts, before I started reading the book, The Way to Live, and I'm really glad I did learn and get those books, but what I found to be very therapeutic for me was what Billy said about love, particularly in terms of the creation. Our universe, Billy refers to it as the creation. He doesn't use the word God. He says that the universe has a consciousness, but it's not a personality. It's not a God the Father figure. It's not a Mother Nature. It's a neutral, positive entity. It's neither good nor evil. And it has no personality, but it radiates love. See, we don't understand that because we look at love as being an aspect of a personality. And evidently it's not. So our universal consciousness is referred to as a Wesenheiten in the German. There's no term like that in the English. The concept is hard to wrap your mind around. The other Wesenheiten would be water, gases, stones. These are things that have this spiritual energy. To a degree, they have their own consciousness. And this is new information for me, but a Wesenheiten, I would say, another way I look at the creation, the universal consciousness, is in many ways more like a tree. Now, experts have told me that trees do have a sex to a degree, but generally they're kind of generic. They're not male or female. I don't think of a tree as male or female. Now, a botanist might know the difference, but we see a tree as pretty neutral. It's beautiful. It brings shade. A group of trees are even more beautiful. And they're very important, but they don't speak. They have no personality that we know of. They're very neutral. But they radiate this beauty. And they radiate beauty because the creation itself expresses its love through the beauty of its creations. And Billy wrote about that. He said the incredible splendor of nature is the visible expression of the love of creation. So creation, it radiates love. And you have the opportunity to radiate love as well. And you should think about radiating love to all people, to all animals, to all plants. And think about bringing this love outward. So I didn't know anything about the Might of Thoughts. I didn't know anything about the psyche. I didn't know anything about the way to live that Billy had written. But I started to study the concepts of love. And they were very profound, and I had a very difficult time. For example, one of the things he says about love, he says, love is the highest principle in all creation, and through it everything exists in absolute logic. So I had to think about that for the longest time. That love and absolute logic go together. For example, if you look at the trees in the forest, they produce shelter for the animals. And they do that because they operate according to creation. It's creation's laws. The other thing that the tree does is it grows towards the light and gets taller and taller. And when the winds come across the top of the forest, it creates a turbulence. So as these trees grow taller, they produce this turbulence. The turbulence helps form clouds, which brings rain, which helps more plants grow and helps more animals. You see, there's this absolute logic to everything that functions in nature. Now, it's very interesting. If you look at a tree, it grows according to these fractals. The branching structure of a tree is very similar to the branching structure in your circulatory system. And if you look at a planet, if you're up in space and if you're looking down at rivers, they also sometimes branch out, very much in that same kind of branching structure. And what you're seeing there are the repeating patterns of nature. Again, everything exists in absolute logic. And that is part of the love of creation. You see, everything that's been created functions in this absolute logic. Another phrase that I learned was that every plant and every tiny animal fulfills its purpose in love. So if you look, for example, at a kitten or a puppy or a flower, for example, it's responding, it's fulfilling its purpose in love. You see, and that's the way humanity should be. But because we have turned away from love and we've turned away from the creation, we become hateful. So there's was talking about the hate earlier. And we have rotating hate in our country right now. We have a hatred between the left and the right. And this is destroying all of us. This is pointless. This is destructive. It's, you know, if you throw a pebble into a pond and it brings out rotating little circles from the waves, well, your thoughts are just like that. As you think, it's like throwing a little pebble into a pond and it rotates outward. What's interesting, if you throw 2 pebbles into the pond, these waves will rotate outward. And if these waves are in harmony, if there's a resonance with these waves, they strengthen one another. For example, if what I'm saying is in resonance with you, with your thinking, it will strengthen you and it will strengthen me. Now, when 2 people are not in resonance with one another, then their energies will weaken one another. And that's why you go on a lot of these shows on the internet right now, and they argue back and forth. And what they're doing is weakening each other. So that's one reason why I don't think debates are the best way to share information. It'd be much better to share information in a neutral, positive way. Let me get back to this article that we were reading here that Billy has written. It says, it must be understood from this that love, peace, harmony, freedom, as well as goodness and dignity are effective correctness and of lasting, indestructible value only when they come forth from the spiritual gamut. So, let's see if I can find this in the book The Psyche, which I think is the most technical book he has. And I remember reading this book the first time, and I think it was I was in an airport, and I forget the name of the airport, Flagstaff, I think, trying to read this, trying to understand this. It was blowing my mind. I had to read through it many, many, many times. But there's something called the Gemüt, and it's discussed on page 10. It's a German term, and it's part of our spirit form. And I was stretching my mind trying to understand all this. The Gemüt is referred to as the spiritual blocking factor, which within the spirit body of a life form. By the way, we have a spirit body, which Billy hasn't talked about much. I would like to learn more about that. But in the spirit body of a life form, in this case, the human being regulates and looks after the spirit consciousness-based feelings and the spirit consciousness-based thoughts. So the Gemüt is the part of your spirit form that looks over the thoughts and the feelings of the spirit form. Now, its corresponding thing is the psyche. In your material consciousness, you have what's called the psyche. And the psyche looks after your material-based thoughts and feelings. So these are the controlling factors. The psyche controls the material consciousness. The Gemüt controls the spiritual consciousness. So let me continue here. It says, contrary to the psyche, the Gemüt of the spirit realm cannot be influenced by negative powers. So you could be having the worst negative thoughts. You could be driving yourself miserable and making everyone else miserable, rotating negative, horrible thoughts, wanting to do all these horrible things, but you have not hurt your spirit form. You have not hurt your spiritual consciousness. You have not hurt your Gemüt. Contrary to the psyche, the Gemüt of the spirit realm cannot be influenced by negative powers. So there's this part of you that cannot be hurt by spirit, by anything negative. It cannot be hurt. Let me continue. As with negative powers, etc. It's only enforced, your Gemüt is only affected by neutral positive energies. So the spirit form is amazing like this. Therefore, means that only powers corresponding to a negative, neutral positive, equalized form penetrate into the Gemüt, through which the Gemüt always exhibits an equalized harmony. So what our goal is to have our psyche have the same equalized harmony as the Gemüt. So the Gemüt always exhibits an equalized harmony from which the half-material psyche profits to a certain extent. So the harmony of your spirit, the harmony of your Gemüt particularly, profits your psyche, because the Gemüt supplies it with a harmonious swinging wave. And Billy talks about nature and these harmonious swinging waves. And there's a writing in the Goblet of Truth which says, stones, plants, rivers, bushes, trees, everything that crawls and flies on the earth is a life form with a spirit form, and these spirit forms are on a journey through time. And many of these creatures are aware of each other, and they are connected to one another by these psychic swinging waves. And the way I always say, if you look out in nature and you watch the birds move as a unit, my interpretation is that's the function of the psychic swinging wave. So the gamut supplies the psyche with these harmonious swinging waves in necessary amounts, in which case part of these swinging waves originate from the realm of cosmic electromagnetic life energy. And what happens, and I was talking about these extraterrestrials like Pelagon, that could control, that could help plants grow with his mind. He could float around. He could literally, because the swinging wave from his gamut was so powerful, and his material consciousness worked so much together with his spiritual consciousness, he can do amazing things. And this is where our ancestors, who were very primitive, got the idea of God rather than the idea of creation. And that's where they got the notion of worshiping a man rather than understanding that creation is what we should be learning from. So anyway, contrary to the material consciousness, which is able to create negative and positive, as well as neutral positive, the spiritual consciousness operates only in the form of equalizedness, and thus in a neutral positive form. So your psyche, your material consciousness, can be negative. And what we're learning in the Mind of Thoughts is to be able to control the thoughts so they're not negative. So you don't have impatience and you don't have a lack of contentment, which can lead to all kinds of health problems. So let me jump back up to our article here. It says, and then it's talking about the fine feeling based thoughts in the creational natural law. It says here, however, if the origin is based only on material mental concerns, consequently resulting only in the basis of thought, feeling, and the psyche, then they are vulnerable and destructible. So your thoughts are vulnerable and destructible if they're not of the neutral positive. Hence, all the high values must have their origin in the inner and true nature of the human being. So your values must have all the high values must have their origin in the inner and true nature of the human being, which is your spirit form, which is connected with the spiritual fine feeling of the spiritual gamut of the spirit form. So we're talking about, again, this controlling factor in your spirit form, which in the final stages of our incarnations, in the life and creational wisdom, we start to be able to harness the incredible power of the spirit form and the material consciousness working together. But it says here, but this is not connected with the material as it is expressed through the outer nature, which brings to effect all that which the human being thinks is correct by his or her own flawed choosing and according to his or her wishes, ideas, and feelings. This happens although it does not correspond to his true inner nature. You see, you can have thoughts that don't correspond to your true inner nature. And that's why Semyase said, if you'll learn to pay attention to your spirit form, it will tell you if your thinking is right or wrong. If someone's treating you unfairly and you strike out against them in some way, if you say something nasty to them, listen to your spirit form. Feel your feelings. You'll feel harmed because you've harmed yourself. Because you thought a thought that was not consistent with the gemut, with the spirit form. Let me continue here. It says, this happens although it does not correspond to his true inner nature. So you want to act and behave and correspond to your true inner nature, which according to the creational natural laws, in true form demands love, peace, freedom, harmony, and feeling for others, as well as goodness and dignity and so forth. So, our inner nature has the answers if we can look within us. Let me continue here in the book, The Psyche. It says, therefore, speaking of the Gemut, therefore, negative and positive are harmoniously equalized and also create a corresponding harmony which the Gemut absorbs and works with, and indeed in both the spiritual as well in the material realm. Thus, now think about this, the Gemut has no direct connection with the material body, and indeed then also not when the human being erroneously speaks of the Gemut as the factor from which supposedly comes forth the feeling life, and it talks about all of the things related to that. So the spirit form is very unusual. It has a great power. It is neutral positive in nature. It survives death. In fact, it never dies. It will tell you if your thinking is right or wrong if you've learned to pay attention to it. But we have a material consciousness which is different from a spirit form. The material consciousness, it can be harmed. It can think thoughts which are unhealthy. So again, the goal is to continue to think in a neutral, positive way. And creation is the pattern that you can follow, because creation, the universal consciousness, is always neutral, positive in its thinking. And there's a great movie out on YouTube called The Evolution of Creation. And it's been created by a guy named Michael Uderbrock, who speaks about the creation. And it talks about the wake and sleep cycles of creation. And it's based upon the spiritual teaching of Edward Albert Meyer. And Michael Uderbrook says that creation is not a god or a father figure. It is absolutely without gender. It is both positive and negative in complete equality. Creation is neutral. Its power and wisdom is the greatest in its own space and time structure. But creation must continually evolve. So creation is, remember I was describing the Wesenheiten? Creation, I think of like a juggernaut. I use the term juggernaut because for 155 trillion years, which is one of the wake cycles, it continues to evolve day and night without stopping, without taking a break. And it creates human spirit forms, it creates planets, it creates stars. But it's not a father figure. It's the term God is kind of a misunderstanding that occurred in the ancient past on the earth. The creation must evolve. There is no God out there that no longer evolves. That's, the big difference there. If you think of the religion's teaching about God, God is perfect. It's usually a father figure. He's the heavenly Father. Creation, that is not reality. This notion came into our thinking erroneously, and it's been passed down on the earth, and maybe we'll get into the Talmud of Emmanuel a little bit later. But the creation must evolve. The universal consciousness evolves. This is one of the laws of nature. Everything must continue to evolve. And you must evolve. And if you don't evolve, you'll have misery. Creation must evolve. Creation is bound to something called the laws of the creation, which is a higher power of consciousness. It's called the creation. And the creation, the creation of this creation, is part of an idea of the creation, the next higher creational form. So is a prefix which means most ancient. And there's something called absolutum, which is even a higher might and consciousness. So our creation, our universe, is the lowest form of all creation. There are other universes out there, some higher, most higher. The Tao universe is our sister universe. It's also in the lowest form of all creations. The evolution of these two universes, the Tao and the Duran universe, were created about 46 trillion years ago in something called the Big Bang. Our creation has the lowest swinging wave. It is the least old and the least developed of all creation forms, but it still lives according to the law of evolution. And this involves striving. So if you do not strive, you do not have evolution. So the law, I called creation a juggernaut because it never stops striving. We human beings have to take breaks. We have to take a break or we'll burn out. We'll become out of control of the good human nature. We'll become a Sartung in the German. We'll become out of control of the good human nature. We'll lose our neutral positive. If you try to strive 24 hours a day and never take a break, or just strive too much, you'll be out of harmony. But on the other hand, which most people do, is they have inhibited striving. Now, inhibited striving, and if you're at a point in your life, you may have inhibited striving. It means you have inhibited evolution and stagnation, and it can lead to hopelessness and grief. So I don't think people quite understand, and I'm the same way. People do not understand the responsibility to continue to strive the way they should. And they fall into hopelessness, grief, and confusion, irrationality. We were talking about the irrationality in our society earlier. You know, all these people, Antifa and all these people out fighting, if they were striving, they would not have time to fight. They would not be irrational. They would be working. You know, if you find yourself in stagnation, if you feel a sense of grief and irrationality, unpeace, then it could be from lack of striving. Okay, I got a question which says, how do we compare contentment with striving? Well, that's an interesting question. I always had to learn to take breaks in my striving because my contentment would go away. If you're striving, and you may have to take a break every 15 minutes to maintain the contentment. You must maintain, above all, the balance, because otherwise joylessness can come in even though you're striving. So you have to be striving in a smart way. So harmony, happiness, everything positive is related to how pronounced the striving is. But if the striving becomes, if you go outside of the good human nature, if you lose your neutral positive balance while you're striving, then your striving becomes a sense of misery because your striving is not effective. So, what's interesting about creation is it never goes out of neutral positive. It's constantly neutral positive. It has the lowest swinging wave. It is the least old and least developed of all creation forms. Our creation is at the very beginning of its evolution. So you can see we're not talking about God here, right? We're talking about our universal consciousness is also striving. It's not immutable. It continues to evolve. It has a certain amount of time to perfect itself. Then it goes back into, it contracts for 155 trillion years. It goes into a what's called a great time. A great time is one expansion and one contraction. Is this 311 trillion years? So that's a wake cycle. That's one great time. I don't think that also is the sleep phase. So that's the big cycle that goes on. Is the expansion, the contraction, and then a sleep. The creation does sleep. And before its next cycle. Got another question. Contentment is more like satisfaction and happiness than fulfillment. In other words, if something is completed, it doesn't need to strive. I don't know of anything. I don't know of too many things that are complete. Yeah, I guess in that sense that's true. But I don't think creation is ever complete either. Let me talk a little bit about the 7 belts of creation quickly, and then I want to get to the Talmud of Emmanuel a little bit. There's a central core, which is the very center of creation. We have something called the Ur-core belt, which is the second belt. We have the third, called the Earth-space belt, and the energies of Earth-space are very positive, and they flow into what's called the material belt. The material belt is the universal material belt. That's where all the matter exists, where all the planets, suns, galaxies, comets, gases, all the dark matter is. The 7 space-time configurations of the solid state matter universe is a part of that 4th belt of our universe. There are 7 belts in the universe that rotate against each other. The 4th layer is the material belt. That's where all the matter is. The positive energies from belt 3 are coming in. The negative energies from belt 5 are going in to the 4th layer. That's the negative energies come from belt 5, which is the transformation belt. And so eventually the negative and the positive come together to form material. The negative and the positive are 2 forces that belong together and should never be separated. So if you have something in your life that you're probably going to always have some negative, is what I'm trying to say, in your life. Just remember that it's a negative and a positive that comes together. I'm not saying they're like if you, for example, are an alcoholic, you need to defeat alcoholism for sure. That's a negative in your life. But once you defeat that, there will be something else that arises that will create the balance. And there's a principle that's also related to striving is even though you're striving and you're doing about everything you can, there will be occasionally something which will pop up, which will be like the additional thing that is just, wow, I didn't need that to happen. Well, that's the kind of thing that occurs. And that's your real test to stay in the neutral positive above all. Okay, we started talking about Orion and the constellation of Leo and the Great Pyramids. We talked a little bit about reincarnation. We talked about the coming civil wars in the United States and a whole series of potential bad events, which is really the collapse of society. We talked about some solutions for that, which comes from the Might of Thoughts. I talked a little bit about creation, which is our universal consciousness. But and we read a few things from the Psyche, the book The Psyche, and the book The Way to Live. And I'm going to read a little bit in the last 10 minutes of the show here from a book called The Talmud of Emmanuel. Some very controversial. This is Billy's, by far, his most controversial stuff. And I avoided this for a long, long time for various reasons. And I'll get into some of that. But the term Jesus Christ, according to the Meyer information, the designation Christ comes from the Greek language and means the anointed one, which corresponds to a free translation of the Hebrew Messiah, and is wrongly used in the New Testament as a name of dignity for Jesus of Nazareth. According to the Meyer material, Emmanuel was not named Jesus or Yeshua. Let me just say this much. There was no letter J in the ancient world. Not in the Hebrew or the Aramaic of the Old Testament, not in the Greek of the New Testament. If you get the very first version of the 1611 King James, they quickly did another one. But if you get the first one, there was no letter J's in that either, because James was spelled I-A-M-E-S in English. Jesus was called I-E-S-V-S. Now, this is very interesting. There was no letter J. So Julius Caesar was not called Julius Caesar during his lifetime. Job was called the Book of Iob. So Emmanuel, the Meyer material says his name was Emmanuel, was never named Jesus, was never named Yeshua. Hebrew for Yahweh is salvation. At his birth by his mother Maria and foster father Joseph, he was called Emmanuel, completely in accordance with what Isaiah or Yaziah prediction, which was well known to the two by the celestial son Gabriel. The name Jesus Christ is made up. And this is the first thing, when I did my own research on this, this is what astonished me to no end, is this term was made up, is made up accordingly from the Greek form of the Jewish proper name Yeshua and the epithet Christ. But nonetheless, the emerging Christianity falsified the name Emmanuel, or I think sometimes I hear the people in the Meyer groups say Yemanuel, and deceitfully use the name Jesus for this. Remember, there was no J sound in the ancient world. Not until about 1550 with Gian Giorgio Tristano, the Italian scholar, who first started using the letter J, which was then presented in the letters supposedly written by the apostles, but which were truly written by non-apostles. So the book of Matthew, the book of Mark, they were not written by those people who were knowledgeable. All of these, whether it's the book of Mark, the book of Matthew, these were not written by apostles. They were written by scribes. Okay, so let me continue here. As a proper name from which Jesus Christ formed. So the real name Emmanuel was not handed down. Rather, the false name Jesus Christ was. And in this was a central figure of Christianity arose, which found expression as the center of proclamation in the New Testament and in the Christian teaching, as well as the wrong, irrational Christian teaching about belief in the second person of the Trinity. So you can see why I didn't really get into this for a long time. And I have a very good listener who sent me this book because I still hadn't bought it on my own. So I guess I'm going to have to go with this, right? Let me continue here. With this was the irrational teaching concerning the proclamation of Jesus Christ from a Christian perspective. The proclamation by Jesus Christ, quite in accordance with the Christian irrational teaching, is contrary to the true, humane, open, and not definitive teaching of Emmanuel, because the erroneous Christian teachings are characterized by a radical and definitive interpretation of Jewish law in order to feel that he has come. This is shown, for example, in the ethics of the Sermon on the Mount in the New Testament and the preaching of the kingdom of God which is at hand. Now, let me talk a little bit about what at least the Meyer people say happened. We've only got like 5 minutes left. After Emmanuel was nailed to the stake. He was nailed to the stake, powerless, and recovery, he left for his homeland. And eventually, after the quote-unquote crucifixion, he traveled to India. Emmanuel married a woman named Aikira, princessly ambassadress. I guess she was some kind of ambassador. She was an Indian of Aryan descent, which is very interesting, with whom he had several descendants. So Emmanuel had his first son, Joseph, who returned to Jerusalem after Emmanuel's death. And they brought the scroll of Judas Iscariot. Now, we are out of time. Judas was named Judas with a Y. We'll have to catch back up next show. I appreciate you guys listening. You're listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Have a great day. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.